Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you all. Tonight is an interesting night. It's a little cool outside. It's raining and sort of a relaxing and reflective night. And I realize I've been talking about a lot of different topics, and I've been sharing a lot of ideas that I've sort of experienced and used in my life for great benefit. But I never really talked about sort of how this all came to be. Why have I ended up learning all this stuff and using all this stuff, and why did I need it in the first place? And I figured I would take a moment and just share a little bit about that. Kind of difficult to talk about, but not that much. I'm a fairly open person, I guess. So I guess it really starts. I had a somewhat difficult childhood. I can't say I really had the most difficult of all. A lot of people had it a lot worse than me, and a lot of people have challenges I can't even imagine. But as you may know, I was diagnosed with juvenile diabetes, type 1 diabetes, when I was about 11 months old. And having diabetes as such a young child, I basically had to learn to give myself injections when I was like 5. I never really had much of a youth in terms of carefree and having no responsibility. My entire childhood, I had to be responsible, because if I wasn't, my life was at risk, right? And I also had some other health concerns and other physical and mental health issues and whatever else, and ADHD and depression and whatever else, bipolar. All of these things that came with time, and those were definitely things that were difficult to handle and difficult to take care of. But they gave me a great appreciation for, I guess, how lives can be different, how things can be different, and ultimately how, even difficult circumstances can be overcome. And one of the most, I guess, forged in my memory of my youth is the fact that my parents divorced when I was very young. I was 2 years old. And my parents, both my mother and father, really loved me, which was a nice thing. But one of the things that I quickly learned at a young age was that although both my mother and father loved me, they hated each other more than they loved me. So that if they had a choice to hurt each other or to take care of me, they would choose to hurt each other. And that was a very difficult way of living to live in, being torn between two different people who are both supposed to care about you and love you and take care of you, and having them be more interested in hurting each other than in taking care of their child. It was a difficult thing in my youth. And I guess for that and for other reasons, again, the mental health, the diabetes, all of the other physical and other challenges that I had, I realized that I dealt with quite a bit of, I guess acting out is really what you would call it, like bad behavior. I was a good student. I was always really good in school, but I had behavior issues. I was very argumentative and sort of, pretty hyper and pretty hyperactive and all that kind of stuff. And I also ended up having issues with a lot of my peers, my friends in school. It just wasn't a very, friendly or encouraging youth. It wasn't a very encouraging childhood. I got bullied a lot in school. I am short. I've always been short. And I remember I used to play football with the kids in my neighborhood, in my little cul-de-sac in Columbia, Maryland. And I used to really love football. I loved to throw, I loved to catch, I loved the wide receiver, I loved all the positions. And then everybody else kept growing and I stopped. So I stopped playing football. But I was smaller than everyone else. And so I was also bullied and picked on a lot. And I ended up becoming very sharp with my tongue, and, you know, being good at insulting people and making fun of people and things like that. And I've since, in my young adulthood and adulthood, gotten out of that habit. But you know, I was always sort of fending for myself, whether it was the illnesses or the family relations or the friendships or the neighbors and other kids picking on me, whatever else. It was a difficult situation, right? And having all of these challenges. But one of the things that I realized was that I was not happy when I was very young. And I distinctly remember when I was either 7 or 8 years old, at that point, I didn't really know who God was. I wasn't very deep in religion. Of course, I went to Sunday school and, you know, learned and read things, but I wasn't, you know, a very religious person at that point. I sort of knew some of the ideas of Islam, but didn't really dig deep into it. But I said, God, if you hear me, if you're out there, if you show me a way that is better than the way I'm living now, to get me out of this mess that I'm in and to get out of this miserable condition that I'm in, I promise you I will follow it. And I made that oath when I was very young. And I distinctly remember the circumstances. There was a lot of argumentation between my parents. There was difficulty. There was stress. There was agony. And in my part, there was depression. There was sadness. There was misery. There wasn't much hope at that point. And again, I was 7 or 8. Like, what could possibly be wrong, right? But I didn't feel very good. And so I made that plea and I made that offer and I made that deal with God. I said, if you find a better way, I promise you I'll find it. And a few years passed and I did find a better way. I did explore psychology, sociology, social work, psychology, all of these fields. I studied the Islamic sciences. I studied Ma'rifa. I studied Ma'rifa is translated as knowledge of God, knowledge of the soul, recognition of God, spirituality, Gnosticism, you know, all of these kinds of topics. And I dug into them, and I dug into philosophy and debates about why God exists and how God exists and all these other kinds of things and all the debates and all that other stuff. And I really dug deep into it. And really what I found beyond the philosophy and the debates and the science and the polemics, right? That's all arguing with the mind, but it's not really ultimately all that impactful. What really benefited me was the knowledge of the soul and the knowledge of connection with God and the spiritual connection that Allah, that God has blessed us with. And there is so much amazing treasures on this path as I've been unfolding, and so much so that I feel like, you know, I look back and I wonder, you know, would it have been better if I didn't have this childhood of challenges, if I didn't have this childhood of struggle? And ultimately, I think that Allah, God gave me all of these difficulties, number one, to teach me how much worse it could be, and how living a life of guidance and a life of walking the straight path and doing the soul-searching work and doing this energy work and doing this self-purification and self-work and physical, emotional, mental exploration ultimately is everything. You know, it sounds like a lot of work. It sounds really dry. It sounds really hard, but it's actually the most fulfilling, and it gives access to joy. I mean, again, I can't even express it. It's so hard to share what is possible when you've never tasted it. You know, it's kind of like imagine somebody who's never eaten chocolate, right? How do you explain what chocolate tastes like to somebody who's never had it before? And, you know, words don't do it justice, right? You can't really do it. But all I can say is that I feel like God shaped for me a life path built on hardship and challenges in some respects. And of course, in other respects, I had many blessings and many easy things come for me. But there were challenges, and those challenges allowed me to take account and to make a decision about whether I wanted to continue this way or whether I wanted to seek a change. And I decided to take a change. I decided to pursue what I believed was better and was possible. And I can really only thank God for instilling within me the belief that something better was possible. There are many people in the world who, unfortunately, their conception of as good as it gets or as good as it can be is as good as it is now. And they don't see that the world can be better, that the life can be better, that the soul and the spirit can grow. But I'm really happy that after all of these difficulties and all of these challenges, that I found the path that I'm on, and I wouldn't change it for the world. I was talking to a dear friend of mine, someone who's sort of a mentor on this path and somebody that we spend a lot of time together, and he was commenting, and I sort of agree with him, right? He said, if Oprah Winfrey had offered me, $10 trillion or whatever amount of money in order to swap places, would you do it? And the answer is no. All the money in the world can't buy the joy and the heartfelt contentment and the connection with God and the connection with others that comes from doing this life and living this life and practicing the spiritual practices. There's just nothing like it on earth. Nothing even comes close. And ultimately, this is what God is asking us to do. Like, what is our mission in life? What is our purpose in life? Getting to know God and worshiping Him properly. And the only way that you can worship Him properly is by getting to know your own soul, because He's the majestic creator who created us, right? So what life's calling could be worth more than this? What efforts could be more valuable than this? What wealth would be better than this, when the result of this path is eternal bliss and peace in this life? A lot of challenges, difficulties. I remember I was having a conversation with somebody who I had just met, and they said, "Wow, Omar, you seem like you're really good at handling difficult circumstances." I said, "Well, I've had enough of them. I've had my fair share." But really, being on the spiritual path and being on the path of self-exploration and soul-searching gives you an incredible amount of reliance and resilience, because ultimately you're able to see challenges as what they are, challenges, not the end of the world, not a calamity, not destruction, just something, another step on the path. Imagine you're hiking up a mountain, and one time that you stub your toe and you stub your toe once and you fall into a ditch twice, and you run into a tree the third time or whatever. Those are just different pieces of the road. That's part of the adventure. That's what makes it an adventure. That's the definition of an adventure, right? It's got hiccups. It's got, challenges to overcome. But all of these things that we deal with in our lives are things that are designed for us to evolve. One of the things that I've come to in my understanding of God is that God is incredible, right? God is greater than everything and anything to which He could ever be compared. But if you look at all of creation, whether we're talking about the heavens or the earth, whether we're talking about the cosmos and the universes and all the other universes and the stars and the sun and the moon and the other planets, and if you look in the depths of the oceans, and if you look at the fish and the sharks and the whales and all the animals, and you look at the land, and you look at all 9 billion humans on earth, ultimately, God is taking all of us, all of these creations, all of us, and He's guiding us towards our completion and perfection. And in the case of a tree, we know what a tree is. And we know what it looks like when a tree starts off as a seed, and it starts off as a fruit, and then the seed, and then it's planted, and then it grows, and then it turns into an apple tree, and then it bears fruit, and then those apples are still immature, and then they become ripe, and then they become sweet, and then if they stay there long enough or too long, then they become overripe, and they fall off the tree, and then they create more trees. That's the life cycle of a tree. And ultimately, God is designing every one of those trees and cultivating all of them and guiding them to their ultimate perfection. Not that one has to be bigger, or one has to be smaller, one has to be greener, one has to be red, but he's guiding everything in existence towards its ultimate perfection. And he's doing the same thing for us. He is guiding us towards our ultimate perfection if we will take his guidance. We humans have free will, right? Somewhere in between free will and predestination, the happy medium, right? But we have a choice to go in line and to yield to God's guiding us towards our ultimate perfection and grow as he's instructing us to grow. Or we have the choice to reject and to resist and to fight against it. And ultimately, that's our choice. And we ultimately are the ones who live with the consequences, both in this life and the next. But there's just nothing, there's no, there's just no pleasure or joy on this path that I've experienced anything like it. And especially knowing from where I came and how difficult, at least in my own estimation, my own childhood was. I think that it's a beautiful experience, and it definitely makes this, this way so much more encouraging and so much more helpful. And it's why I like talking about it. It's like why I like sharing about it. So I hope you've enjoyed hearing a little bit about how I came to this path and how I've been walking it and why I've been walking it and all that stuff. And yeah, it's kind of an interesting night. Like I said, it's raining out. It's calm. It's quiet. A little chilly. It's a very reflective night for me. And sometimes I'm overly energetic and excited about things, but tonight is a night of reflection for me. So I just wanted to share, and inshallah, God willing, I'll talk to you guys soon. Salam. Peace.